spirit of enlightenment. Today, we embark on a reflecting journey with the realm of ideas as we delve into a session of profound significance, that is, pathways to a dominant and inclusive India. In this intellectual voyage, we have Dr. Ganesh Natarajan ji as a distinguished guest. Dr. Ganesh Natarajan is the chairman and founder of 5F World, a distinguished figure in the realm of digital startups, skills and development in social ventures. Holding a master's in industrial engineering and NIT Mumbai, a PhD from IIT Bombay and an advanced management certification from Harvard Business School. Dr. Natarajan has garnered accolades as a technology entrepreneur and people-centric leader. With a career spanning over 25 years, he has served as a CEO of EPTAC, propelling it to a global leadership in computer training. His subsequent role as a CEO of Zinzer Technologies witnessed remarkable growth, achieving a market value of 44% CAGR during his tenure. Post-2016, Dr. Natarajan emerged as a successful entrepreneur and investor, contributing to the digital landscape, currently serving as the chairman of Honeywell Automation India Limited and Lighthouse Communities. He sits as the board of prominent organizations such as Hinduja Global Solutions, SBI Payment Limited and Educate Girl. In conversation with Dr. Natarajan, we have respected Seema Verma ji as an engineer by profession. She is retired from aviation where she trained pilots on Airbus. She is adorned with National Sajta Award bestowed upon her at a ceremony graced by the Honorable Prime Minister. She led a groundbreaking waste management project as a president of the Defence Wife Welfare Association. Her visionary leadership resulted in a significant reduction of the landfill waste in the Andaman and Nicobar Command. Currently, she channels her passion through the NGO Saksham, dedicated to empowering rural areas. Within Saksham, her focus spans skill development, health, education, environment, and rural tourism. Thank you so much, ma'am, for being with us. Also in conversation, we have Rajat Kathuria, sir. He is the Dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences and Professor of Economics at Shiv Nadar Institute of Eminence. He is the former Director and Chief Executive of the Indian Council for Research in International Economic Relations. He worked with the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India during its initial years. He is currently the co-chair of the T20 Digital Task Force under India's G20 presidency. I invite you all to the stage. Please invite them with a big round of applause. Without any further ado, let's begin this interesting session. Over to you, sir, and ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, good evening, everybody, and warm welcome to this session. It's a privilege for me to be, chatting with this excellent author of 13 books already. Wow. And as he said, we are going to keep the session. So his bio, etc., has been read out. We'll keep the session as light as possible. Seema will also come in, so I will start this. So I want to make 2 points, very quick points before we start. So this is an excellent book, Pathways to Dominance and Inclusion. I think both ideas are reflected in the book. It's a great book to read. I would encourage you to read it because there's some really nice, sort of robust academics who've written the chapters, and that's really and a preface which is really very good. Preface has been written by Mr. Narayan Murthy, a very good preface, and he talks about culture, which Seema is going to reflect on. I wanted to make 2 points. When you study economics or when you study the country, there are 2 themes that I learned when I went to college. And I'm not going to tell you when. And they still seem to exist. They don't seem to have gone away really. And those themes are both reflect that we will, India has huge potential. Huge potential. And that said, we said that even then. That is the dominant part. We will become dominant. And the other is, there's huge divisions within the country. Whether you want to characterize it as, rule Bharat and India, as somebody has done, those divisions continue to exist. Both those characteristics or themes are, germane, alive, and how to get around them, both in terms of policy as well as, I think much more importantly, implementation. And we sort of have this concept, but I wanted to sort of, based on those two ideas, because they are both reflected in the book, dominance and inclusion, I'll turn to Mr. Natarajan. I can call him Ganesh, it's easier to do that, Ganesh. Ganesh, so, talk us through what got you to write this book, on the back of so many other books that you have written. What was the key idea that triggered the thought of dominance and inclusion?
Thank you, Rajat. And let me first say where I come from, because biodators are very fooling, as you can imagine, so they only talk about the good in you. But I actually was raised in a little village called Tatisnivai, never heard of it, near a small town called Ranchi. Till 15 years ago, I used to say Ranchi, people used to say, what's that? But after Mahendra Singh Dhoni, that changed. So everybody knows Ranchi. Okay, but they don't know Tatisnivai. And this was 12 kilometers, is 12 kilometers from the city of Ranchi. Why did I grow up there? Because my father started a company. Obviously, my father is South Indian, so he moved from Kanyakumari, the absolute tip of the country, to Calcutta to bring up a family of 14 siblings. He had 4 brothers, and the rest were women. And brought his parents, and like any other typical middle class family, we grew up together. And then, after around 1962, when I was 5 years old, he moved the family to Tata because the company had started, was setting up a factory in the most advantageous part in terms of financial intensives, which in those days was Bihar, now Jharkhand. That's how I grew up. And when I grew up, and this is something I say in a lot of things, and in fact, if you read the second book, The Passage Through Life, that's my last book, you will find a character who actually is me. I just changed the gender. So my experiences are very much her experiences. But literally my father's house was the only brick house in a hamlet of 5 villages. So all my friends were village kids. We grew up blissfully aware of what real life was all about. And I still remember I was probably in class 8, or I think it was 8, when somebody told me about this thing called IIT. So I remember I was studying in a convent school called Bishop Escott. And I went to our principal. We all used to call him Fitzy, though his name was Frederick Algernon Fitzgerald. So I told him, Fitzy, I want to get into IIT. So he said, let me stop laughing first, and then I'll answer your question. I said, why are you saying that? He said, look, this is a little convent school meant to educate the Adivasi tribals. A few people like you who speak English also come here. But please, we are not teaching you enough physics, chemistry, math for you to get into IIT. So I was really down for it. I said, so what do I do with my life? He said, look, we are teaching you good English language and English literature. So just focus on that, participate in as many elocutions and debates as you can, and you'll be successful. I really didn't believe it. But there was no other option, so I did it. And I remember actually in class 10, this was senior Cambridge, so 11 grades. So in class 10, I applied to Cambridge University and got in. I got admitted to the bachelor's in English literature. So I was very excited and told my father, not to worry, I'm sure it's not too much money, I'm going to Cambridge. He said, look, let me tell you, it's a reality of life. I was telling Seema this. You can either do engineering or you can do medicine. There was no options. So I said, oh my God, I don't like cutting cockroaches, I can't do medicine. So he says, now you have only one option. So you prepare and get into it. And of course I didn't get into IIT. But I did get into the friendly neighborhood college called Birla Institute of Technology, what's called VIT Mesra nowadays. Now it's a good college, but in those days again it was 1974, Jayaprakash Narayan was beginning to happen, and all we learned was how to do Ganga Fasad in the city and very little of mechanical engineering. So this is how I grew up. Now you may wonder how did this biodata happen after that. But I think it was that, and what Fitzy told me is so true. He said when you're 65, is what I am now, he says you look back in your life and say what really helped me to achieve some modicum of success. And he said it's because you knew the English language well. And all the books I've written and the work I've done in leadership is more because the ability to communicate. And I don't give myself any great credit. I've actually run a company called Aptech, which was in computer education. ran a company called Zensar Technologies for 15 years, which was obviously in software exports. But the skill one learns is really rich. So to answer your question, Rajat, why the books and what's the genesis? I mean, I started writing on topics which I was actually doing practical consulting in. Started with an area called business process re-engineering, moved into knowledge management, then of course leadership, etc. Then in Pune, my wife and I actually collaborated on a book called Digital Success. Why Digital Success? Because in 2019, as many of you will remember, that was when we all started getting a little hyped about digital India. And Aadhaar had come in, and the Jam Trinity, as Prime Minister Modi calls it, Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, mobility was beginning to happen. This was before UPI, but it was really beginning to feel that, look, digital India would be the success story of the future. So that was our book we wrote literally 3 years ago. Then in the Pune International Center, which is very similar to the India International Center or Bangalore International Center, we started to form a group of very intellectual people. In fact, Vijay Kelkar, who was the well-known finance secretary, had moved to Pune, this is hometown. Dr. Raghunath Mashalkar, also like Vijay, a Padma Vibhushan and one of India's foremost scientific advisors. So these two gentlemen started Pune International Center. And this was around the time in 2020, when if many of you remember, one fine morning we got up and the Chinese had come on to Pangong Tso, which is Pangong Lake, occupied the Galwan Valley, and this was COVID times as well. So I remember 6 of us got together on the phone in Zoom, and we started meeting literally for 2 hours every Sunday on Zoom. And this was, of course, Dr. Mashalkar, Dr. Kelkar, a gentleman called Gautam Bambawale, who was the ambassador to Pakistan and then China. Then 2 economists, a gentleman called Ajay Shah, who started the Center for Monitoring the Indian Economy. And of course, Ajit Ranade, who was then the economic advisor to Kumar Mangalam Birla, then moved in to become the Vice Chancellor of the Gokhale Institute of Economics in Pune. So 6 of us wrote this book on how do you face up to the China challenge. So this was the first book we published through Pune International Center. And then the premise was very simple. China was militarily, continues to be far superior to us. So obviously the army gave a fantastic response in Galwan, no doubt about it. But we knew that military was not the only response we could do. So we said diplomatically, economically, militarily and various other ways, what are the ways to respond to China? And that book became so successful, and I measured the success by saying that the first person to call us was the High Commissioner, the Chinese High Commissioner, saying you've got it all wrong, and China is not like this at all. And with this very democratic, voice-oriented system. Absolutely. So, but you see, the book has already been published, so next edition we'll make all these changes. And because of his protest, and I think he even wrote to the Ministry of External Affairs, we actually got a very interested gentleman who was the Secretary of the MEA, who said, look, you guys have written about China, and you're getting all this negative flack from China. Why don't you write a positive book on India? So, which is when this book, which is our second last book, India's Pathways to Success, which is actually the one that you were alluding to, Rajat. So we got some, it was edited by me and the principal economist for Asia in the World Bank. So we kind of wrote 40% of the book. But we got very interesting people to contribute. And what we did in that book, and I'm coming to the last part, what we did in that book was saying that, look, what are the areas by which India can really become this dominant, great superpower that we think? And as you rightly said, I grew up at a time when we used to have this thing called the Hindu rate of growth, if you remember, 3.5% per year. And the Indian economy was always like an aircraft on the runway, threatening to take off but never taking off. Today we are very happy that, we moved from what it was to obviously growing at 7.3%. So we're all very happy with that. In Mumbai yesterday, the longest bridge was inaugurated, the Atal Setu. A lot of great things happening in infrastructure, which we wrote about in this book. A lot of great things happening in digital India, which I mentioned, because UPI is a worldwide success story. The fact that you can literally, any chaiwala will accept a UPI code, and I understand, to have no proof, that even the cows in Varanasi have a URL painted on them so that you can donate directly on by using your computer. I haven't seen it, so not vouching for it. So that's actually amazing. You see what's happening in digital infrastructure, physical infrastructure. We wrote about that. We also wrote about, if you read the book, a lot of the shortcomings in productivity in the 3 core sectors, whether it's agriculture, manufacturing, in spite of the PLIs and everything we hear about, India has a long way to go to manufacturing, and services. Because even services, and I'll talk about it if we get time later, although we are very hyped, and I myself come from the IT services industry, there's still a long way to go. And finally, of course, we wrote about some of the shortcomings. One is very clearly, I've been listening to it since morning at the festival. And one clearly is women's participation. I think all of us know, whether it is gender equality, whether it's a perception of equality in corporate India, or rural India, the tribal areas where we operate and educate girls, still a long way to go. Also problems that we are seeing in mobility, for instance. I mean, we still have problems of the cities being overcrowded. Bhopal, you are probably blessed. But if you go to Delhi, Bangalore, even Pune, where I come from, it can sometimes take you 2.5 hours to go from one to the city to the other. So I think those are the issues we wrote about. We also touched upon the logic of inclusion, saying that look, it's all very well to have so many people, be the Ambanis and the Adanis and the Tatas of the world, but there are still 200 million Indians, our countrymen, our countrywomen, who are actually marginally above or below the poverty line. And are we trying to ensure that they get included in our big thing? Because as we all know, we definitely by 2027 or 2028 become the third largest economy in the world in GDP terms. But the worry is that even in the G20, we are in the bottom 2 when it comes to GDP per capita. And I think the point we're making is that look, there's a lot more work to be done on inclusion. And then, when we finished writing this book and this became a very big bestseller, so then I thought here's a time for me not to write another serious book, but to write my novel. So my novel is all about my best friend called Fantush, who was actually the village boy I grew up with. And it actually paints the story of a girl who grows up very successful in the corporate sector, like many of us have been, but suddenly discovers that one of the 200 million, okay, which is in an entity that we now set up in Pune and other parts of the country, called Lighthouse. And the novel is all about, so how does one really think about India? I mean, do we just get hyped by the India that we think we are, the dominant India, which of course we will be? Or do we get very worried about inclusion? Or is there a golden mix where intelligent people in this room can think about, in a very practical way, that the glass is neither half full nor half empty, but we have to do our best as caring citizens to make the glass half full. So I think that's really well. I'll stop and hand it over to Seema.
Hello. So when I was, my name came for the panel thing and we started exchanging mails. So he says, no, it's not only about one book. You have to read the second book also. So first I read this book, which was, intellectual book, I would say. And then I said, okay, I'll get ready for reading the second book. And the second book was an easy breezy love story. So I couldn't understand, same author writing India Pathways to Success on one hand, and then there is this passage through life. So I was very curious to meet him. And when I read the book, so that is what I wanted to know, that how this kind of contrast in two writings, that a love story and and now he tells me it's autobiographical. So he's changed the gender of Sharon, the main character. He says that's me. So very interesting to understand Ganesh through this book. So what made you write this easy breezy love story?
As I said, the idea was that if I write a preachy book on inclusion and talk about the urban poor and we do a lot of work in Madhya Pradesh in the tribal areas of MP. And if you really go and see the lot of, for instance, just to give you an example, in COVID times, I don't know how many of you are aware that in MP, Rajasthan, UP and Bihar where we work, all the kids dropped out of school, naturally. You couldn't go to school and you came back. But post-COVID, 70% of the girls who dropped out of school have not gone back to school. Now you may ask, why only the girls? Because they're happily engaged in housework, the farmer has put them to work in the fields, and of course, early marriages still happen. So I said, if I write about this in a very preachy sense, nobody will. So which is why one of my very good friends who kind of critiques most of my novels said, now it's about time you write the great Indian novel, make it small, as you rightly said. Nobody reads large novels nowadays. We don't have patience. We're all part of the WhatsApp movement. But if you write a small enough book that somebody can pick up in the airport and maybe read on a flight from Delhi to Bhopal, that'll work. So I'm happy to say that this has got a very good response. So we actually translated it to Marathi, and the Marathi version actually sold more than the English version, which is, I think somebody was saying in the earlier session that vernacular probably sells more in India. So that's the reason. So the love story, by the way, is incidental because I had to bring some romantic masala.
So I was about to say the same thing, that yes, because I work in a village, I work in rural India, and I've adopted a village. And I was saying, if you could get it translated into Hindi, maybe I can make my children in the village read. And what he said about 70% women dropping out is a fact. In my village, all the girls that were 10th, 11th, 9th, 10th, 11th have not gone back to school. Whereas boys have been forced to go back because ladke hain, padhna chahiye. Ladkiyan, the mothers have got so used to them looking after, taking over the responsibility that mothers are also very happy if girls are not going to school. Now the other thing he's written, the book starts with Sharon born in 1990. And he doesn't stop at 2023. The book goes to 2047. So he's already visualized where Sharon is going to be. Her husband has a $200 billion company now.
Wow.
And
he's a slum guy.
And he's a slum guy. And he wrote a lot about lighthouse, and he's mentioned his name, Ganesh. So I somewhere thought that there's some connection between this Ganesh and that Ganesh, and did a little research on it. So I happened to be in Pune last week. So I called him up and I said, I would like to see lighthouse. That lighthouse is doing amazing, amazing work. I would say what he's doing in social sector is much more valuable and important than what he's doing in the intellectual world. They started in 2016 with one center. Today in Pune they have 21 centers. And would you just throw some light on, I think there are thousands and all over the country. We must know about his work in lighthouse, in the social sector.
In case you people think that this is going far away from the book has a lot of lighthouse in it.
Lighthouse, all the books, yeah.
And why a lighthouse? I mean, this is something that in Pune, we started thinking about in 2011 or 2012. And that's when a group, I was running a company called Zensar, a very good friend of mine was running Cummins, another person was running Thermax, and Pope's Marshall, and finally Big Feet, as you know, the custard company. So 5 of us got together and said, look, we're all making a lot of money, we're all corporate CEOs, but maybe it's time for us to give back and help the society. So naturally in Pune, like in most other cities, the biggest problem of the day was traffic. Pune, of course, is one of those strange cities which still thinks it's a small village. So if you see a red light and you follow the red light, people will honk behind you, because you're supposed to follow the red light only when there is no other traffic in front of you. Traffic is improved, but people still don't do it. So there are lots of Pune rules, as we call them, in traffic. So we went and told the commissioner of the day that, look, we're going to help you to solve the traffic problem. The commissioner said, please, you're all rich industrialists, you go pay your taxes and don't interfere in the government. Raghavji, I hope you forgive us. So we were very crestfallen and said, nobody wants our help. Then what happened was, I don't know how many of you know, I'm sure Bhopal is not very different. The city of Pune has 685 slums. And somebody told this to me and it was eye-opening. So we actually spent time with ourselves and the social workers saying, what is it in the slum that is different from what we see in our children? And the answer is very similar to my friend Fantush in Tata Silva. And the same problem of what we call lack of agency. Because nobody told them that you can dream of being Shah Rukh Khan, you won't achieve it. But nobody told them you can dream to be as successful as anybody else. And I said, look, we have to do something about it. So what we did was, we first studied what was wrong with the skills movement in India. As many of you know, when Prime Minister Modi became Prime Minister, one of the first big announcements he made, and fortuitously from my own hometown of Ranchi, was the Skills India mission. The minister of that time, Rajat, also set up the NSDC. But the sad reality is that in the first 2 or 3 years, NSDC, although they set up a lot of training centers and encouraged people to set up skill centers, hardly 12% of the people who went through schools programs actually took up a job. And out of the 12%, 50% dropped out within 2 months. So we actually did 6 months of research on why this, and found that, look, we in our superior wisdom, we are sophisticated, middle class, upper middle class, rich people. We said, if I set up a plumbing training center, they will come. We're doing them a favor. Right? Not only that, we're giving them chai and lunch. So there are, in fact, I did a lot of research in Dharavi last year and found that there are people who have attended 7 successive skills programs. From plumbing to carpentry to fashion design to whatever. And you ask them, "Bhai, kyo kar rahe ho?" He said, I'm getting pressure from my family ki tum ghar se bahar raho. And I keep doing these courses. The courses are nice. I get free lunch, I get free chai. I have no intention of doing anything. So that's when we realize that we are not allowing the person to dream their own dream. So today, what Lighthouse does basically is, we are not a skills company. We are, but that's not the point. We mobilize every child from the youth that is possible. They come into one of 14 lighthouses in Pune. Now we have in Delhi and Hyderabad and starting in UP. We're saturating the whole of Odisha. A lot of stuff happening with lighthouses. But the basic theme is, what is your dream? Now, try this as an experiment. Now, go to your maidservant's son and ask him, Bhaiya, tumhara sapna kya hai? He will not be able to answer. Because nobody has told him he has the right to dream. So in the first 10 weeks, all we do is through gamified processes, etc., we allow them to free their mind. And when we first met the municipal commissioner then, he was very sophisticated IAS officer called Kunal Kumar, who is now the mission director for smart cities. So Kunal said that, look, if you guys think that, look, corporates can do social work and scale by yourself, not going to happen. Use the government. And like everybody said, no, we had one bad experience with the commissioner who said, go away and do your stuff. He said, no, you try me. He said, one thing I'll tell you when you do big social work is, do not take money from the government and absolutely do not give money to the government. And the logic is very simple, right? I mean, so how does that work? He said, look, there are 200 unused buildings just in the city of Pune. Go around, look at them, tell me what you want. We'll create these 5,000 square foot open places and we call them lighthouses. Where Seema went to was one of our new lighthouses, which is very close to, I mean, it's a very open environment. Why open environment? Because the slum youth has been so festered up in that little home that he belongs to, that when they come in and see, wow, ye to mere liye bhi hai. And then they open their minds, and the 10-week program just makes them dream, which I've actually described in this book, what agency building is all about. And once you are the agent of your own transformation, which is what agency is, then we ask them to choose, what do you want to do in your life? We didn't ask them when they joined the lighthouse. But then they answer the question saying, maybe I want to be a guitar instructor, maybe I want to be a gym instructor. We may not have the course, but we have today tied up with every skills provider in the city of Pune, that the government has given us the facility fully, we're not taking money from them. We raise anywhere from 30 to 40 crores every year from corporate and large foundations, and we use that to run the centers. So the model has been one of public-private partnership, and I think what that has done for us is today we have children joining Bajaj FinServ at 28,000 rupees salary, and they are as confident as your children are much. So this is, and in fact I still remember, and it's a bad word to use nowadays, but when Mr. Manish Sisodia heard about us from Delhi, he actually flew down to Pune, and his background is social worker. So he spent 4 hours at the same lighthouse you went to and interacted with the students, and he said, look, we have to start this in Delhi. And of course, COVID came, but immediately after that, we've now set up 3 in Delhi, which are funded by the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. And I'm really positive that this, I mean, what is our mission? 1 million youth transformed in the next 5 years. Remember, we said 200 million people need this kind of support. So I think that's really what we're looking at, saying that, look, ultimately, as I said, GDP per capita, inclusion, everything you heard about, especially if you were there in the opening session this morning, it was absolutely fantastic to say what we need to do. And that is what this book is on. That how a Sharon who is very rich and an Abhay who comes through the lighthouse experience, how they kind of interact and how they have a common dream by 2047. And one of my hopes is that every Indian out of 142 crores or 144 crores or 137, whatever it becomes, will share a joint dream, and that's the purpose of this book. Sorry, sounded preachy, forgive me.
I've snatched the mic from Rajat because continuation of what he was talking, I wanted to talk about it. I also worked in urban slums in South Bombay, in Colaba, and the issues that you dealt with were exactly the same. Like they will tell me first session, they'll tell me I want to become an engineer, and after spending 6-7 sessions, I want to open a hookah bar. Where do you want to hookah bar? Colaba. I said, Colaba, how will you? So these were the issues. But now when I've come to rural areas, challenges are very different. So in your book, I like the foreword that Mr. Narayan Murthy has said. He said, without these prescriptions, what they have mentioned in the book, what Ganesh has mentioned in this India's pathway, without these prescriptions, the probability of our success in our quest for India's betterment and for wiping the tears of the poorest of the poor child, as the founders of our republic desired, will be low. However, these prescriptions alone are not sufficient, especially for rural India, I'm saying. They form a grand and impressive superstructure that will bring joy, satisfaction and pride to our citizens. But the real sufficiency comes from the most important causal variable for the success of a nation, culture, which I think in the book or the urban people you do not need to address. But for the rest of the country, you really have to address that aspect. Are you going to write a book for the rural success in rural India, and are you going to address, because Mr. Narayan Murthy has also noticed that.
You know, my worry is the same as Narayan Murthy's, that the problem is, in the future, is not going to be rural. The problem is going to be urban youth. I know nobody will kill me here for saying this. Every year in Pune, the Pune International Center